Hi, I'm Erica Meltzer. I'm the Bureau Chief at Chalkbeat Colorado, and I want to thank everyone for joining us for Return to Learn, a look at where Colorado education policy stands during the COVID era. I want to especially thank our event partner and co-host, the Morgridge College of Education at the University of Denver, as well as our advertising partner, the School of Education and Human Development at the University of Colorado, Denver. Before we get started with the bulk of our programming, I want to turn it over to Caroline Bauman, also from Chalkbeat, to take us through some of our operational details and just how we're going to do this.
Hi, everyone. We're so glad you're joining us today. My name is Caroline. I'm with Chalkbeat. As we get started, I do just want to take a quick moment to get a feel for who's in the room. We know these virtual events are hard. We're so grateful that almost 100 of you have already joined us. We're expecting more to trickle in. So we'd love to hear who you are. The chat box is closed, but we do have the Q&A box, which should be on the lower right-hand side of your screen. We'd love to hear from you, any questions you have for our amazing panelists. If you have any technical difficulties, feel free to throw a question in the Q&A, and my colleagues and I will be watching that. So with that, I'm going to close our poll and share the results just so we can all get a feel for who's in our Zoom room here. Some students, parents, lots of educators and professors, but all of those categories are represented. So we're thankful you're here. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dean Mark Inberg, who's going to say some words.
Thank you, Caroline. The Morgridge College of Education at the University of Denver begins all public events with the formal acknowledgement of the lands on which we convene. I would like to start this afternoon's event by acknowledging that the University of Denver resides on land held in stewardship by the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes. We recognize the descendant communities of the Northern Cheyenne Tribe of Montana, the Northern Arapaho Tribe of Wyoming, and the Southern Cheyenne and Arapaho Tribes of Oklahoma, who were forcibly removed from this land. We also acknowledge the Southern Ute Tribe and the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, which are the only two federally recognized tribes in Colorado. Today, Denver is home to many different citizens of indigenous nations, and we recognize their enduring presence on this land by paying respect to their elders, both past and present. Please take a moment to consider the legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and resettlement that bring us together today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at all public events. It is because of the sacrifices and hardships of the traditional indigenous inhabitants of this land that we are able to be here to learn, collaborate, and share knowledge. I would now like to welcome Dr. Karen Riley, the Dean of the Morgridge College of Education.
Hello. Thank you all for joining us, and welcome to Chalkbeat Colorado's Return to Learn, where Colorado education policy stands during the COVID-19. I'm Karen Riley, and I'm the Dean of the Morgridge College of Education here at the University of Denver. It is an extraordinary time for education and our local, national, and global communities. A global pandemic has changed the basic ways in which we engage with one another and the ways in which we teach, learn, serve our communities, and conduct research. Our country is also in the midst of a long overdue renewed national movement for racial justice, which has challenged all of us to examine the ways in which we can effect meaningful and systemic change and address social injustices. The challenges are complicated and complex, but our mission and that of the University of Denver has not changed. We strive to effectively connect theory, research, practice, and service with meaningful social change that is rooted in deep reciprocal relationships with community members and their diverse interests, needs, and values. Our simple goal is to improve the human condition and to make things better for others, regardless of their race, ethnicity, culture, economic position, geography, and/or ability. So we are so excited to host Chalkbeat Colorado, who we know is committed to covering the most important and timely topics in education today, keeping us well informed so that we can continue to live out our mission. We're also honored to welcome our panel of legislators and educational leaders today, and we again commend Chalkbeat for bringing together an interesting group with differing thoughts to provide all of us with an opportunity to learn and to really listen. Education is by its nature political. It's based on policies that are developed and informed by those we elect to serve our communities. It, however, does not need to be contentious. And during a time in our country in which we find few examples of individuals from across the aisles coming together and centering the needs of their constituents, I'm proud to be in a state where we can come together and have informed and deep dialogues. I've worked with many of these on the panel to improve these systems for the benefit of children and families across our state. And personally, and on behalf of the Morgridge College of Education, I want to thank you for your service and look forward to the discussion. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Kaya Cockrell, who is a recent graduate of Fountain Valley School in Colorado Springs and is our 2020 Colorado Poetry Out Loud State Champion. Kaya?
Thank you. The title of this piece is Black Horrors. I've never been afraid of horror movies. All of it's unrealistic, containing supernatural bits and kids running and being chased as if crap won't follow them. I've never been afraid of these movies because they aren't scary. Not scary like being enslaved by another race and expected to behave as if you are inferior. Not like getting pulled over in fear you lose your life on that very day or pay the price of being Black by being the greatest you can be and notice all stare and believe because even though we dominate in love, we are considered the minority. See, that's my idea for horror stories. Like, imagine this. The movie comes on showing a Black father who is deprived of love from his kids, and he loves them but can't do anything when they're in need, even though the 10 grams caught on him were to get them something to eat. Imagine this. I am too scared to have kids because I know that my Black boys will be wrongly convicted at least once in their life. Imagine the horror and not being able to eradicate the strife derived from preconceived notions carved into the heads of people who I should believe are supposed to do justice. This is what's tough. See, I know my Black boys will be wrongly convicted due to pigment that powerfully possesses their beautiful vessels. I fear of cops giving Black eyes to Black guys to teach them this lesson called never think you are equal. And even scarier, that sequel is about that cop on trial. He cries and lies to say that my son was a thug with a threat. He gets off on paid leave and I am permanently in debt from the death of my son, only because his skin was oh so loved by the sun. Thank you. With that, I would love to introduce JL Ayema, who is a high school senior at Thomas Jefferson High in Denver and a published poet.
Hello. This piece is called Pretty, a Conversation. You called me pretty for a Black girl. Did you realize your words have weight? Your words have brought me sorrow I haven't yet escaped. I hear it often, I'm just used to people's hate. A hatred for my nose and lips, a hatred for my brown eyes and hip dips, a hatred for my stretch mark covered legs and arms that reach, a hatred for the way I slang or speak. You called me pretty for a Black girl, and I appreciate your candor. I'm just confused because I thought Black girls didn't live up to your beauty standards. I have no silky hair, no green blue eyes, no slim nose or extremely thin thighs, no pink pout or a skin that's smoothing. I'm just used to those features being called the epitome of beauty. The sun soaks into Black skin. Our afros rise high, our brown eyes glisten if they're angled just right. Our lips full and plump and our curves are satisfactory. I'm proud to be Black so I don't have to pretend to be. Face it. In your world, Black girls are only pretty when we straighten our hair articulate our speech and wear what you wear. We're only valued when we assimilate to your trends, pretend we're fancy, or attend schools too expensive to attend. We know you like us better in studs than hoops, and when we don't act the same, you exclude us from groups. You're getting red, you're embarrassed because I'm speaking the truth. Don't walk away from me now, I'm still speaking to you. Guess what? I know you probably feel like I'm wasting your time. Just remember, friend, that Black beauty is the blueprint of mankind. Guess what? Your words are kind of hypocritical. You say my melanin is pretty, but you treat me like I'm criminal. Guess what? I realize your compliment wasn't one at all. It was a microaggression that made me feel dejected and small. I know, you know, we live in different worlds. I'm just tired of white people telling me that I'm pretty for a Black girl. Thank you. And now to Erica Meltzer.
Thank you both so much. That was incredibly powerful. Again, I'm Erica Meltzer. I'm the Bureau Chief for Chalkbeat Colorado. And Chalkbeat is, if you're not already familiar with us, we are a nonprofit news organization that focuses on education issues with a particular lens on equity. I'm going to introduce our panelists now. Joining us is State Rep, soon to be State Senator James Coleman from Denver. He's also the Executive Director of FaithBridge, where they've been working very closely with families on their educational needs. State Senator Paul Lundeen from Monument, former State Board of Education member and longtime presence on education policy at the Capitol. Mark Sass is the Policy Director for Teach Plus Colorado. He's also a high school social studies teacher in the Adams 12 5-star district. And then we have Taylor Davis. He's a CEA fellow and music teacher in the North Park district in Jackson County, bringing us a perspective from a rural district. Thank you all so much. And while those words, I want to start with something that's not directly related to COVID. While those words are still fresh in our minds, we have been going through a dual crisis of racial injustice alongside the pandemic, which has of course impacted communities of color much more strongly. I'm hoping the educators on the panel, can you talk about how you're addressing racial injustice in the classroom, and in particular, how you are helping your Black and Latinx students feel supported?
I can go, Mark Sass. And first of all, thank you to Kaya and JL. That was, to center us in the work that we're doing. For me, since I'm a U.S. history teacher, there is just this wonderful opportunity to draw parallels to, the end of Reconstruction and moving forward. And so it is an opportunity for us to make these direct connections, to talk about the impacts that we still see today, the continuation of what's going on. And so for me, it's embedded right in with the curriculum that we use. It allows me to have some real hard conversations with students. Certainly the challenge has been in the modes in which we're teaching. It's difficult to make those personal connections when you are remote, when you are behind masks, and it's hard to see facial expressions. So it's a huge challenge to have those, to be able to just see those cues that you want to see from students when you're having hard conversations. But as a U.S. history teacher, this is an incredible opportunity to make some connections. And so that's really the work we've been doing and I've been doing in the classroom.
Thank you. And Taylor, how do you see this play out where you are, and what are you doing in your classroom?
So I'm actually doing a book study through Copilot right now that focuses on this very thing. I'm originally from Alabama, and have been a part of more diverse experiences than currently teaching in Colorado. So I'm trying to bring that personal experience to the table, but also knowing that part of addressing it is knowing that representation matters. So I'm actually working on, in my music classes, we're having a person of the week and a word of the week. And the person of the week so far has only been white male composers because they dominate the history of the art. So going forward, finding people that look like students that go to my school and people that look like people that live in Jackson County, being cognizant of the fact that we do have a heavier Latinx population than we do African American or Black at my school. So I actually crunched numbers, and the population for Black students at my school is 1.3%, which is a small number for a small community. And then it's about 50-50 for the between Caucasian and Latinx members of our school. So my main thing is just showing them, when I do examples, not just what you would see on the most searched on YouTube, showing them that there are other people that have been successful that might not have the same color skin that I have. And on top of that, not only showing males, but females, and like bridging that gap further and showing them that outside of their race, that their gender can also be successful.
Thank you. And Taylor, you started the school year with in-person learning you have that entire school district in one classroom. What's been something that's been going really well, and what's one of your larger challenges right now?
So it's kind of twofold. I'm very thankful that we've been able to be in person. We actually ended our first quarter today. So there's something well that's going on. We've been able to keep ourselves healthy enough, and the challenging part has been keeping up on policy changes and making sure that we have a safe environment for our students to be in. So especially being the music teacher, having, scholastic experiences through music while still having to be masked. And we've tried playing with masks, and it's been push comes to shove. We've done a lot of work, and we're just still trying to make that work. I do see K-12, so it's difficult to stay on the positive side of everything that's going well, because I automatically think, what if this happens, what happens? But my district has also been very supportive, and we have plans in place for whatever happens. So the positives have been very great, and that we're able to bridge the gaps from when we weren't able to see them from March to August, and really build those relations again with the students in the community.
Thank you so much. Mark is in a large metro area district. He started the school year remotely and then transitioned back to the classroom. What's something that's been going well, and what's something that's a big challenge for you?
What's going well is we're back in the classroom, and I'm incredibly excited to be physically in the classroom with the students. I think that's been a huge help, and so what's interesting is that since we're on a hybrid model, I see half the students for 2 days, and then the other half the following week. So I've got 15 kids in my classroom, and because of that, I'm able to know those kids and able to work with them one-on-one, socially distanced, of course, wearing masks, but I'm able to spend a lot more time with them and interact with them that I normally would not have in a classroom outside of this time period. The challenge is, for teachers, we are all about planning. If we can't plan, we go nuts. And so this uncertainty is something that's always something that we're trying to deal with. Are we going to, at what point will our rates go up to where we'll have to go back to remote, and what's that going to look like? And so I can say that the challenge has been, and every teacher that I've talked to, and I've talked to quite a few around the state, and those of my colleagues, even if you're a 26-year vet like me, this feels like my first year all over again. And so that in and of itself brings its own sense of anxiety, because especially on the technical side, it's been a challenge of learning so many different apps, so many different platforms, and making sure that those are all working well. So great to be back in the classroom, but this issue of not knowing makes it really difficult for a teacher to really think ahead as to where they need to go.
Yeah, I know from the parent perspective, the not knowing and the different platforms is a big challenge as well. I want to turn to our lawmakers, and you both are so passionate about education issues. When you look at what's been happening with education, what are you most concerned about, and what is something that the legislature could do about that issue? And let's start with Rep. Coleman.
I was going to come on and defer to the one who really knows what's going on, Senator Lundeen. No, first of all, Erica and everybody, thank you so much for having us. Real quick, before I answer the question about, what's going on, what are we seeing regarding education in the legislature, I just got to give a shout out to Kaya and JL. I know that they're both off. I'm not sure if they're still able to see this, but it meant so much to me to hear their perspective, which is a perspective that I share, and especially JL talking about not just being the most beautiful Black girl someone's ever seen. It's like someone telling me that I'm articulate for a Black man. I've been told that at the legislature as an adult. And so for me, I just want to say thank you to Mark. Thank you to Taylor being from Alabama and being able to bring appreciation inside the classroom to people's cultures. That lets them know then that is wrong for people to say those kinds of things to them, so that when they become adults, they know I got to have grace for this person because they don't know what they're talking about. And I'm beautiful as a human being, period, not because I'm beautiful for a Black girl. So I'm just, I'm grateful for all the work you all do. It's so much more than academics. It's so much more than growth, proficiency. You many times spend more time with our kids than we do as parents. I have 2 children who are in Denver public schools, and their teachers do so much for them. So I don't know. I just want to tell you thank you. And I think we ought to appreciate you now more than ever before, especially because of remote learning. Listen, the things that we're hearing and what the concerns are, of course, they're funding, right? They're equity. There's evaluation. I saw a question in the Q&A about that. There's pods, right? I mean, something that's new. How do people individualize learning for their kids and have specific opportunities to do that? And some folks may not have that same ability in more low-income neighborhoods to be able to do that. For me, I focus out of those 4 issues right now mostly on equity. I'm hearing about equity now the same way that I was hearing about equity before COVID-19. And so I'll just go on that one very briefly and then turn it over to my good Senator Paul Lundeen. But equity is not being able to have food, which I'm grateful for. In many cases, in the state of Colorado, school districts are trying to find a way to provide that for kids to have a meal, because it's one thing to talk about evaluation, but it's another thing to talk about them being tested and not having anything in their stomachs. It does change your performance. It's the same thing when it comes to whether or not you have access to Wi-Fi. There's a digital divide. Some of our kids have really good quality service, some don't. And thankfully for some school districts across the state, we've been able to provide access to laptops and internet. And so I think for me, it just continues to be the same issues before that we're seeing now. And I know we have more and more folks that can talk about this, so I don't want to take up all the time, but I just want us to recognize, back to what Kaya and JL talked about, experiences as being Black women, Black young women, is that there are inequities that have been exacerbated in our communities that have always existed. And it's not just skin color, it is for folks who are low income, who may be white. We have to figure out a way at the state level to fund education in a way where we're being responsible with our dollars. But I think we do need the funding in order to make sure that you have what you need, Taylor, what you need, Mark. And one last thing I'll say on this, the director from the school, the Morgridge School of Education, she said that we're creating policy. Paul and I are just creating policy by ourselves. I'm not in the classroom. We have to hear from you as teachers on what it is we need to be doing and how it directly affects you. And we know that's different across the state, but we need your help in crafting policy so that when it's actually implemented by you, you were a part of crafting it in the beginning. So thank you for giving me a chance to just share that perspective on what we're hearing at the legislature.
Thank you so much for that. And we're going to dig, we have more questions coming in the Q&A and some already prepped that we're going to dig deeper on these issues. Senator Lundeen, what is concerning you most, and what is some action that you think the legislature could take on that?
Thanks very much, Erica. It's good to be with you. I want to thank Chalkbeat for hosting this. I always enjoy these conversations. I love the breadth and depth of perspective that we have the opportunity to engage with. I like the fact that we've got educators, policymakers, and students. And I would start also by passing along my gratitude to Kaya and Jael for sharing their perspectives. I beat the drum constantly that we need to acknowledge and understand and respond to the students as individuals as they present themselves to the educational opportunities that we are trying to provide them through the learning systems that we have. So, you know, in the thank you column, I want to be sure and thank also Morgridge College and DU for supporting this ongoing dialogue. So from that, I would go to COVID and what's going on and how do we respond to this? And it's pretty clear from a policy perspective, we've got some really big challenges. It is heartening to me, and I hear it from any number of districts, and we've heard it on this call and in this conversation, that we're coming back to the classroom. From the time of Socrates, it's been the tradition that the most effective way to pass along learning and knowledge and wisdom, which at the end of the day, in my perspective, wisdom is what we're all pursuing, is the most effective way to broadly do that is one-on-one, face-to-face. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some rock stars, some superstars, some online efforts that are doing remarkable jobs. In fact, that is true. That is happening. And online distance learning, distance interaction, distance communication, as we're experiencing right here, right now, can be incredibly effective, and it's a very important tool that we have to use. To the challenges, we've got financial challenges because a system that perceives itself always to be under financial stress now has bona fide, legitimate additional burdens, just public health cost burdens that it must bear. At the same time, that we need to be thinking even more. I mean, if we've learned one thing from coronavirus and COVID, it's that the system we had that was not delivering equitable, brilliant, across-the-board services to all students is even doing a more challenged job of that now, or doing less well. And part of that is because it's difficult to respond to the circumstance in which we find ourselves. And the students who were struggling perhaps most, the students who were showing up with the greatest needs before coronavirus are the ones who are in fact catching the most damage, potential harm, the losing the most, falling into deeper holes than anyone else because of coronavirus. So that's the challenging side of what we've got to deal with in both the practical service delivery area and the policy space. What do we do about this? We're struggling with it in the schools now to try and figure it out. We will be struggling with it in the policy environment as well. But the good news is, organically, by virtue of the people that we are trying to serve, the students and their parents, we are seeing ideas rise up. Organically, these ideas are coming out of the ground. And we need to be responsive to that. For instance, and this is where the disequity, the inequity is potentially most visible. Students who have affluent parents experienced, as things were getting challenging, affluent parents who said, you know, my 2 kids and my neighbor's 3 kids and that other neighbor's 1 kid, we are going to put together this thing, and they became called pods. We're going to put together a pod, and we're going to hire Taylor Davis because that guy knows how to teach. And we're going to get him to come in and help our kids not miss a beat, not miss a step. Brilliant, appropriate response to those people. But not everyone has the ability to do that. So it goes right back to an opportunity for us to learn. How do we resource things so that they are nimble, they're responsive, that they deal with the student as that individual student finds him or herself, as opposed to how do we fund a system that then turns around to the students and says, hey, we've got these services, we provide them in this way, come and get what you can get. And we will try to make it as good for you as we possibly can. So challenges and the opportunity to learn some really clear organic things that are coming out of the ground, right where we need to be giving our greatest focus, and that's the people who are seeking to receive service, seeking to get what we should all be about, and that's learning opportunities for students. I'll pause there. I could go on, but I will pause.
I know you could. So I actually do want to stick on that funding issue for the next question. That's always an issue at the legislature. We're in constrained, going to be in an even more constrained fiscal environment next year. what are some things that could be done to free up more money for education? If we do give more money to parents, how do you do that without undermining the ability of school systems to serve the function that they need to serve? And how should we possibly change how we distribute school funding? And
Sure.
so I'll let you kind of
I'll jump right back in and I'll be brief.
Yeah.
I will make an effort to be brief, which means it'll only take me 30 minutes to get through this answer.
Okay.
I see it this way. I see we have a need for and an opportunity for parallel paths. We've got the primary path. I mean, public education in Colorado is roughly a $13 billion per year enterprise. That's a big enterprise. It's going to keep going along. It's going to keep doing what it needs to do. At the same time, we have a need for, certainly during the coronavirus crisis, we have this need. And I think this is a need that continues to live on, persist beyond coronavirus. And that's for a parallel path. We need to be figuring out ways, and this is the most difficult time to do it, but it's the most critical time that we be willing to take that challenge on and actually do it. And that is fund alternative paths. So you've got a system, big system, $13 billion system under pressure, saying, you know, we're going to need more money, and that's a legitimate request. There are public health challenges that now have to be managed, and that costs money. At the same time, if we really want to be not about the system, but about the students, we need to say, you know what, and in this moment, we're going to have to figure out a way to carve off some of that money to support and resource things differently, to support things differently. And I've got ideas about where I go with that, but I'll pause there. You know, it's hard to gavel somebody down on Zoom, so I'm trying to be very sensitive to not pressing my case too far.
I appreciate that. I'm going to hand it back to Rep. Coleman. You and I were talking about some ideas you had about freeing up money within the budget, but I'd also like you to respond to some of the ideas that Senator Lundeen put on the table.
Yeah, look, I actually love those ideas. I'm a both and guy. I think you're going to find that, knock on wood, God blesses us to both be in the Senate together. We're gonna find ways to work together because that's what we have to do. So I think those are great ideas. I think what you and I talked about, Erica, in particular, was what we were forced to do this year. This year, we all showed up to the legislature with bills we were going to run, had fiscal notes attached to them. Then COVID hit, and then anything that had a fiscal note attached to it the funding got stripped or the bill died. So that to me was, while we had some great policy, I think that folks were going to introduce that, you know, cost money. We started really thinking about, like, these are great ideas, but like, what are the essentials? And so, like, for me, I'm not just looking at the bills that I ran. I'm looking at everything that we have currently going on in the state of Colorado with, you know, multi-billion-dollar budget. How do we figure out a way to repurpose dollars that may not be being spent well? I'm not talking about shutting down programs that don't work well. I'm talking about, or that do work well. I'm talking about ones that don't. And one example that we gave of this was the Department of Corrections. You know, again, I don't want to get into a whole, this isn't about criminal justice but we're talking about the economy. We're talking about how do we have more dollars available for things that we all agree we should be spending money on. And one example of that for the DOC was talking about the recidivism rates when people get out of prison and go back. It's 50% of the people in the state of Colorado, when they go out, they get back in prison after only been out for 3 to 6 months. And if each one of those individuals costs us roughly $30,000 to $50,000, I got a prison right here in my district with $25 million worth of failure in it. We're not correcting behavior and preparing people to get back into society, because clearly they go back. And so that's not just the Department of Corrections level, but so many other areas. We really need to genuinely look at how we're funding and what we can better do with those dollars. You know, we've had the Tabor and ballot initiatives. They keep failing, and we keep pointing at that, saying, man, if only we could pass that. You know, Senator Lundeen and I just can't sit here and say, well, our hands are tied because of Tabor. We can't just say that. You know, people are looking to us to actually help solve the problems, and we can't just keep blaming it on a formula that's in our budget. And so, you know, for us, I think, and for me in particular, I'm trying to figure out a way where we do a better job assessing where the funding is currently being spent in the legislature and repurposing it in an area where we know it really needs to be spent, and that is education. Not saying that we don't need DOC, not saying that folks don't need quality service, but the point is they're not getting it right now. If we got those folks what they needed, we could repurpose those dollars and put it towards things that matter Black education, and that'll be a focus for me over the next few years.
Thank you. I want to turn this back to our teachers. And what do you see in your building, in your classroom? Where are the places that you feel like more funding would be making a difference, either in your ability, particularly with the COVID challenges that you have?
Well, for me, it's, you know, I think for us within the classroom, I think the challenge was, you know, we certainly have the challenges in front of us right now, but I think we missed an opportunity where we really could have used some support, which was over the summer. You know, we had opportunities here where I feel like we just did not learn from the remote learning that took place in the spring. We never went back, did a deep dive to figure out how did it go, what worked, what didn't. And then to take the time to bring teachers in over the summer and begin to develop curriculum that we can use, knowing that we're going to go remote. How can we use those funds to do that? And I was in a district that went out and bought a curriculum and gave us the curriculum 3 days before we were supposed to go up online with students. A huge challenge. And, you know, it's kind of the business practice of just in time, right? That we're just going to get the supplies you need just in time so we don't have to house it. We're still taking this kind of mentality that teachers are kind of widgets and we're going to hand this off to them and they're going to go and do the curriculum as poor as it was with fidelity. And that was a challenge. And so we need to look at the workforce. We need to look at the professional development that does take resources, of bringing teachers in, of looking at curriculum, of spending time and figuring out how can we do this better. And so for me, that's where I see this challenge. I really felt like districts went after efficiency versus effectiveness. And I think because of that, I think we are starting to see bigger gaps taking place between those kids who traditionally have struggled, which is a concern as we kind of move forward. And so those things are starting to become uncovered. And I think what we need to do is we just have to have the teacher in a position and place to respond to that, but that takes resources. And for me, it's more of a human capital issue than it is anything else.
Thank you. Taylor?
Yeah, I would like to echo on the summer support being a thing. I mean, for us, it went from we were in school to we had to come up with all of these lessons to send out, and being located where we are in Jackson County, not every family has internet access. And if they do, it's not the best. So one thing we have worked on in prepping for this to happen again is having spots available in town where families can come get internet to do the homework. And one thing we did in the spring, one thing I did was I just did paper packets because that's the easiest thing to do. But then you have the families that live so far out of town that they don't want to come more than they have to. So it's things that aren't issues normally anywhere else that come to mind. But the main thing is the internet access. We can't ask students to do work if they don't have the means to do it. And you can't fault them for not being in a place where they can afford to have that internet access. So I think it's giving them the tools able to be successful if we were to go into another quarantine or a lockdown.
Thank you. These are all just huge challenges. I want to do something that's going to bring our audience, this is going to be a little bit interactive. We're going to put up a Zoom poll, and we're going to ask, everyone's going to feel like it's really unfair to pick one. The question is, which of these should school leaders and policymakers prioritize right now? Getting students back into physical classrooms, improving the quality of remote instruction, addressing learning loss with tutoring and other extra support, or giving parents access to money and resources to support their children's education. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to pick one, and just as quick as you can in 1 minute, say why you picked one, and then we're going to share and then once everyone's gone, we're going to share what the audience chose. So we'll just give a moment for people to make their choice.
Erica, I can go first. I think, you know, you're right. It's Sophie's choice here. It's really difficult to make these decisions, but I think what's in front of us right now is that we know that we're going to go back to remote learning at some point. And I think that we really need to make sure that we are prioritizing what that's going to look like. You know, we do need to look at learning loss. We do need to look at tutoring, but we also have to somehow stem the tide of this because, you know, we can't do so much better with that remote instruction.
Thank you. Do I have a next victim on this one?
I'll go next. I'll just say I actually picked tutoring. I actually agree. I agree with Mark. I mean, they're all great answers. I don't think it's a wrong answer. But for me, I picked that because I thought whether we were in school, which again, folks are concerned about health, are there protocols in place? Are we putting our teachers in jeopardy? Are they safe to go back to school? They have to be there and figure out they're going to teach these kids, our kids, without risking their physical health. So when you go back to the remote learning, I think Mark is right. We will eventually be back in it at some point. Many of our kids, my kids are in 4th grade, so they're going to be in school coming up on the 21st. But in middle school and high school, there's a concern that kids are going to be remote learning. I said tutoring, and again, investing dollars into that. Quite frankly, I don't know if Taylor has time at the end of the day, but if he was able to also provide additional learning with kids and be compensated for it, that's not only a way for us to make sure that our kids are getting additional support they need academically, but also maybe another way to compensate our teachers. So that's one of the things I thought we could do.
And I actually think Taylor is already doing that after school to some degree.
He's probably doing it
yeah.
without being paid extra for it too. So thank you, Taylor.
Well, I can talk on that a little bit. So I chose physical classrooms, especially up here with the kids. The community we have is so small and they mean so much to each other that us getting just the first week of being back in person and knowing that it was like coming back from a double summer vacation because they'd had so much time apart, but like getting them back in that aspect of being in the classroom and doing things and giving parents a break, parents that had to become teachers that weren't prepared. And I think also focusing on the social emotional support and learning that you get in a physical classroom that you can't get over a computer screen. And one thing we are doing in that tutoring aspect, James, is we have a program we work with in North Park and in the Northwest BOCES called Fifth Day for the Colorado Aero Lab. And so specifically at North Park, we're offering academic enrichment when we can, and we have before and after opportunities for that. It's myself and 2 other staff members who are really seeing a big change in students, whether it's just coming for that time to talk or they need help on homework or need help on assignments or typing an email or catching up on stuff. So I agree kind of twofold, that in person, but also the tutoring.
Thank you. And Senator Lundeen? Oh, you're muted.
Here we go. This is the question on the poll?
Yeah.
Yeah. So to me, it's a simple, obvious process response. You distribute the authority because we have all sorts of different variables. And the only way to line all the variables up to achieve success is to create freedom. And the only way you create freedom is you knock down silos. And so the way you do that is you move the money to the student, the customer, and then you allow for teachers who are comfortable or able, who don't have a physical restriction, to step in. You create all sorts of dynamism. You create a nimble ability to respond to what we're all pursuing, presumably, and that is the opportunity for the student to advance as opposed to retreat in their learning capacity. And I'm not surprised to see that my choice on the poll that just popped up on the screen, I'm in a very small minority, which in this particular room I would expect. We are, we're populated with policymakers, educators, folks who are, it's our job on a daily basis to get up and go to work in the existing system.
Yeah, but I think, yes, the majority answer was improving the quality of remote instruction. And I think both what Senator Lundeen said and that answer is a really good pivot to my next question, which is across the metro, I believe across the state, we have seen that that Black and Latinx parents are not choosing to send their kids back to school at anything close to the rate that white parents are. That these are families that have seen the impact in their communities, possibly within their own families. They may live in multi-generational households. They just don't feel safe going back to school at anything like the rate that white parents do. And so given what we know about the existing equity gaps, how do we make sure that those children have the education that they need and deserve if their parents are not going to send them back to school. And this is open for anyone who wants to tackle that.
I'm going to dive right back in and seize the initiative here, because that is a fundamental argument for exactly what I'm saying we should be doing. Support people in their culture, in their tradition, with the universal desire to give their child the best opportunity to advance forward in attaining learning opportunities. And when you give the people, all the various people, the authority to do that, it takes an enormous amount of power and money away from the very powerful system that we have. But it feeds what we're all trying to do, and that is come up with new creative solutions to support the students. Quite frankly, it will engender, I believe, responses from, in this case, teachers who become vendors, perhaps. It gives an ability, and there's a lot of disruption in the process. And I'll go back to my parallel paths argument, where I think we've got to keep the existing system in place. It serves a lot of students very well. But at the same time, as painful as it is, we've got to carve resources off and meet those people where they are. If they, for the reasons that they have, they know only to themselves, and they'll tell us to some extent, but we need to support them in the universal effort to make sure their child is not sliding backwards.
Does anyone else want to jump in on that?
So I won that argument.
I know we're here. I know we're here to all weigh in, but I really wish we could hear from our educators more too, because I don't have these answers. I can tell you what I want as a parent, as a Black father of 2 Black kids in a community that is a majority minority.
Well, then speak from that perspective, Jim. That's exactly what I'm asking to hear. That's who we need to hear from.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I'll say it this way. Racial justice isn't just about police brutality. Racial justice is about education. It's about healthcare. It's about housing. It's about food, deserts. It's about so many things that impact a child's learning. And it goes back to what we talked about before. It's equity, right? I think the way that it impacts the community you're talking about, Erica, I mean, I grew up, I was blessed to have 2 parents, but I grew up mostly with my grandmother. My kids have their Oma, their grandmother, living in the house with them now. We're concerned every time we go out, when we come back home, are we bringing anything back home with us? Mm-hmm. And so for our kids to be going to school and either potentially exposing themselves or somebody else being exposed to them and bringing that back, I think is absolutely a concern. But I think at the same time, we've looked at the fact that, and I can't remember where I got this stat from, but it was like for every 8 online learning sessions is the same as 1 in class. This is the school to prison pipeline, man. These kids only get this 1 year to be able to learn, hopefully, before read to learn, so that they can learn to read, so they can read to learn for the rest of their life. And I think we have to figure out a way to address all these other issues in addition to what's going on in the classroom. So for me, when we talk about disproportionate impact, it's not just about academically. Absolutely, that's what we're talking about today. But it's in healthcare, and it's in all those areas we just mentioned. I absolutely agree that we need to be listening to teachers, listening to students, as Rashawn Bliss said, I saw in the Q&A, listening to parents, listening to the whole entire ecosystem, and figuring out a way for us to provide opportunities for all kids. Look, there's a perspective of, let's give everybody their individual dollars and ability. And I'm like, well, look, I'm not going to sit here and argue against that. But what I'm trying to figure out is for those parents who don't have that knowledge, for those parents who don't have the information, how do we inform them? How do we educate them? How do we listen to them? How do we educate ourselves on what they think is best? How do we come up with a holistic plan to make sure every child's individual needs are met? Quite frankly, I can't give you that answer. But we have to figure out now, as I think Scott Esserman said, why are we reacting to COVID-19? Why are we responding to COVID-19? Why are we not already thinking about how we collectively come together? But I don't think that's going to happen until we start figuring out ways to collaborate, because right now, all we're doing is talking about what we individually think. And that's why I started off by saying, I think it's important that we do hear from the folks who actually are in the classroom.
Yeah, and I would love to hear from either Taylor or Mark, sort of how are you reaching those students who are choosing not to come back to the classroom and getting them what they need as best you can?
I can speak on it a little bit. So at North Park, we have kind of done some preventative maintenance on knowing that the way we dispersed information in the spring was not the best. So we have worked as a staff, middle school and elementary and high school, to streamline our process. And we did surveys and got feedback from our community on specifically what would work best. What do you need? And from that, we were able to now, if and when it happens again, we have a plan in place to be able to reach those students and reach those families. And also we have that kind of going on now with our CDLS students. So we have students that are enrolled, but they're online and they're not in the building. So how do we reach them? How are we able to see them? So with the ending of the first quarter, we have parent-teacher conferences coming up, and we're going to meet with the parents that want to meet. You can't force them to meet. Meet with the parents that want to come and have that conversation. But one thing that focusing on making that connection and just letting them, like, streamlining our efforts and really being cognizant of what students need what, and like which ones to push and which ones to like just give the information out for, because a lot of our students are self-sufficient and they know technology better than some of the teachers do. And so that's helpful in this aspect, but also knowing that we still need to support them. And how are we going to do that? And for some of them, support looks different than others. So for us, it's basically being able to tame a horse while you're trying to keep the lion in check backstage. Like it's like a circus right now. But I think we've done very well in preparing, and also from the beginning of these first 9 weeks, supporting in the classroom as well. So we do have students that are homeschooled and also CDLS, and those that are in class because of we are rural and we're able to service all these students this way. And knowing that no matter where they are in the school system or whether they're in or not, that we are supporting them and being there. Hope that answered the question.
Thank you. And I think it's a good point. Some students, we have talked to students who have actually felt like online learning actually was better for them. And we have actually a great story up on our site today from a student who really felt like she could come out of her shell in that online environment in a way that she couldn't in the classroom. And it's not that universal experience. But Mark, what are you finding with your students who have stayed remote?
Well, I mean, as a system, we're not doing enough. It's we're just falling short with this. And again, I don't think we really did a good job of really digging into how things went in the spring to see what we did well and what we didn't. It was a missed opportunity. And so it's just disappointing that we didn't look at that. We actually, when we were remote, our deans were no longer dealing with things that were happening in the physical building, fights, supervision, other things. They had more time now to actually be able to build some relationships and connections with families, which I think was important. Now that we're back, we're kind of back to the same, where we were before. And, when we went remote, it's just so interesting. We're taking the same mindset from in-person to remote, and it just doesn't work. We read stories now about some kids were being disciplined because they weren't wearing their uniform when they were remote. Or, it's taken that same idea and not making a shift, as to what remote learning actually means. And I think we just needed to stop and really think about how we can approach things a little bit differently. I think it's, for us, it was us making the calls. It was the same protocol we were using when we were in person. And I think part of it was just digging in a little bit deeper here to say, why are these kids disengaged? And how do we get to the core of that? What is it that they're not finding is worth it to come in to spend time, with us remotely or even in the classroom? It's the same issues that are taking place. And so I think it's just, part of what my greatest hope is that we use this opportunity, this pandemic, to accelerate some systemic and structural change in education. We just have to. But in order for us to do that, we've got to be very deliberate in how we do that. And I'm not talking about technical changes. I'm talking about things like seat time. I'm talking about things like, what it is we expect kids to do. I'm talking about giving kids, individual kids, the opportunity to learn at their pace. And if they get it, they move on. Why are we holding them in the class forever? It's just so many of those things that we continue to do. The best example that I have of us taking our in-person mentality to remote was we had our kids sitting in front of the computer mimicking the bell schedule from 7:15 to 3:30 with 5-minute passing periods in front of Zoom. It was crazy. And parents are looking at this saying, this is crazy. How do you go 50 minutes biology, you get 5 minutes, then you go 50 minutes English, and it's like, and I'm telling the parents, that's what happens every day in high school. So my hope is that parents are starting to see a bit more of this, because the three constituents who know what's going on with remote learning are teachers, students, and families. Our legislators don't know what it looks like. They've never experienced it. Our administrators don't know what it looks like because they couldn't observe me on Zoom. We're the ones who know. We're the ones they need to be talking to.
Right.
We have, I want to touch on accountability. We have a ton of audience questions, and I want to thank the panelists that have been answering and writing some of the questions in the Q&A, because we could be here for 3 hours and not get to all these questions. So thank you for that. We've had a ton of questions come in about accountability. What kind of accountability system makes sense in this environment? And in particular, one of our audience questions was from Janelle Johnson, and she asked, we have stepped away from standardized testing during the pandemic. As we move forward, how can we utilize testing as one measure of achievement without it driving curriculum, as it has for so many years now? So, what is the role of standardized testing going forward, and what needs to change about the accountability system? And I will let anyone who is motivated grab this first. So, I see you smiling, Representative Coleman. Do you want to?
Yeah, no, listen, I've always believed in evaluation, because I want to know how my kids are doing from one point to the next. What I don't want them to do is be penalized, or their teacher be penalized, because of the circumstances we're in, that we haven't reached certain academic goals, and we don't give you the resources as educators to even get them to that place. That's always been the problem for me. We're always shifting the blame on how a child is being prepared. I think the reality is, if you give an educator, a teacher, a school leader, you give them what they need in order to be able to accomplish the goal of educating these kids, then when we see an evaluation, it's to be able to see how you got from one place to the next. This is something that people deal with in so many other areas. It's not just education. A lot of folks everyone's expected, right, to have the same standard of effectiveness, and that's the word that Mark used earlier. Efficiency is easy. I can fill my day with a whole bunch of meetings, but what did I do at the end of the day? Did I actually get anything accomplished today? So effectiveness is completely different. A lot of times we're being asked to have the same level of standard of effectiveness, which I'm glad for. That's awesome. The problem isn't having a high level, a high standard. The problem is not being given the tools to even do what you need in order to get there equitably. So we talk about equity when it comes to our kids, and not eating, not having clothes, not having electricity at home, dealing with violence. That's the same stuff that everybody deals with, including our teachers. So I'm just trying to figure out when we're going to get to the place where we start evaluating our kids based on the goal of how do we see how you got from one place to the next? Where should you be? And not evaluating off of mediocrity, like evaluating off of the places that are doing the best in the world, number one. But then saying, well, what is the dynamic there? What is the culture there? What do they have differently? Like, we want people to be our kids to be at the highest standards, but we're not equipping our educators with resources they need in order to do that, and expecting them to come up with the same results. And quite frankly, some of them are, right? I mean, we talk about this all the time. The #1 school in middle school in Denver Public Schools is DSST Montbello at Rachel B. Knoll, in a community where people don't expect it to be, as you assume it was going to be in Southeast Denver. No offense to Southeast Denver. But my point in all that is,
I'm not in Southeast.
Good. But my point in all that is, like, we're amazed at that, not only because of where it's at, not only because of that, because also as a Black school leader, right? It's the same thing that our young ladies just talked about when they first started on this call. We're amazed at that. So my point in all that is, I believe in evaluation. I believe we should be figuring out how we show how our kids got from one place to the next to make sure that they are growing. But I don't think we need to be penalizing folks unless we give them the real resources equitably across the board to do their jobs.
And do we anticipate, does this moment provoke a change in the accountability system in terms of the policy? Does it provoke a policy change in how we use standardized testing?
I'll dive in. That's a great follow-on question to the question of assessment and response to assessment. I see that as two questions. I think it's malfeasant if we step away from diagnosing where we're at. I mean, in 2019, the last year, we have good figures. We know 85% of African-American and Latinx children in 6th grade were below grade level for 6th graders. 75% of low-income 6th graders were below reading level. We need that diagnosis. That's point one, and we cannot walk away from that. I think that's malfeasant to do that. Is it precise? Is it perfect? Maybe not, probably not, but at the same time, bad news can't wait, and good news can't wait either. You need to know where you're at. Then the question is, what's the response to that? How do we respond to that? What do we do? And that's where it gets tense, but quite frankly, it's the conversation that we must continue to have. And I think if we care about these equity conversations with the context of education as part of that equity conversation, we have to do some sort of diagnosis of some sort. So a big framing of why it must continue. And then to your question, does this push for a change in the accountability system? Well, I think we should always be thinking about how to have the most effective accountability system we can possibly have. That will be an ongoing, it should be an ongoing conversation. But to shy away from, to just say, you know what, time out, it's tough, and so we're taking a time out, I think that would be a tragic mistake. That's my perspective.
And I'd like to hear our teachers weigh in on this as well.
You know, I agree with that too. I think it's, you know, there was this talk at the beginning of the year of maybe the state coming up with a statewide diagnostic, which I thought was professionally was just not the right thing to do. That's not the purpose of a diagnostic, is to have one that's standardized. That just defeats the purpose of it. It's what teachers are doing in there with the classrooms every day with those kids. That's going to make an impact. It's not going to be some statewide, which doesn't take in a lot of things into account. And I think most researchers said that. For accountability, I think it's still necessary. And I know I tend to be in the minority sometimes with some of my colleagues, but I still think it's incredibly important that we know where we are with how we're doing and educating our kids. You know, the old saying of that which gets monitored gets done, I mean, I think holds true here. The question is, as Rep. Coleman was talking about, is what do you do in response to it? Do you rush resources, or are you punitive with it? And so I think it's still important for us to have those accountability tests in the spring. It's a requirement. It's a requirement of ESSA, and I know that the current administration has said they're still going to do that. But I think it's important for us as a system to just know where we are with how we're doing with educating our kids. Where are the gaps? It's a civil rights issue in my mind.
Yep.
Briefly, I would just say that I think since the situation of delivery of content has changed, that we should make the testing or whatever our delivery or our testing accountability should follow that. I mean, as a special teacher, I don't do standardized testing, so that's something that I didn't really have to worry about. I follow standards and I teach to standards, but they haven't found a way to standardize test music or art or any of other specials. So my 2 cents on it would be to agree with both or all previous parties and say that my 1 sentence is it should change since the delivery of our education has currently changed. It should follow suit.
Thank you. We have a lot of people on this session who are in the higher ed sphere doing research on education and educating our future teacher workforce. And the question from Haley Kate was, what are some of the things, particularly for the teachers, that those in the higher ed sphere could be doing to support you? Whether that's expanding dual enrollment for rural students is one thing that came to mind, but also, you know, anything else that higher ed can be doing to support the work that you're doing in the classroom.
I think the ed prep programs can support the new teachers who are coming into the field by spending a lot more time on social emotional learning, ensuring that teachers know how to deal with that, know how to deal with trauma-informed curriculum. If it's one thing that this pandemic has shown us is that, you know, we knew traditionally beforehand kids in poverty are kids who are traumatized and they struggle to learn. But now that this pandemic has reached all of us, it's become a topic of conversation. And my hope is that we can move forward with that to ensure that it's a part of what we do. And educator prep programs really need to support us on that. And I think it's also one of the things that ed prep programs need to do too is we've just got these different modalities now that we're dealing with when we teach. And we need to ensure that teachers are understand the differences. It's not just, I'm going to take my in-person curriculum and now go online with it. You can't do that and be successful. It is different. If you're doing in-person online, all you're doing is trying to encourage kids to come back in person, because if it's good, they want to come back in person. It doesn't make sense to do it that way. So how do we get teachers to think a little bit differently about what it means to be online and be in the classroom? And then the other thing too, I think ed prep programs can do a better job of is helping us to recruit and retain teachers of color. This has been something that I'm really worried about, is that as we make budget cuts traditionally, and we saw this during the Great Recession, teachers of color were disproportionately impacted by cuts. And that's because they tend to be newer teachers to the profession. And so if you still have, if you still have decisions being made on tenure, it's those teachers of color who are gone. And so I think what we need to do is we need to get more teachers of color out there because they are effective. And teachers, educator prep programs need to be doing a much better job in supporting those teachers of color to make sure that they make it into the field.
So I agree a lot with what you said, Mark. I think that it all makes sense. For me personally, I think the biggest obstacle when we went virtual was, how do I deliver content when all of our stuff is in person and hands-on to students and make it relatable and make it applicable to the time? Because I think from a prep program, it would be a class or two on how to teach music virtually. So we have those programs out there already that they're available, but for me, it's been kind of taking my own materials and figuring out a way for my specific rural area of like what to work and how to deliver it. When the programs I went through in Alabama were both focused on marching band and that kind of education, secondary music education, to then come to a program that was K-12 and then have to teach in a pandemic. So I had to learn more things my first year than most teachers do the first 3 years. So I think for looking specifically at specials, and I say that because that's what I teach, how to deliver a curriculum in a format that is still as interactive as it would be in a classroom, especially with your K-5, and making it where if they don't have the resources, they don't need them. So making it where as user-friendly and compatible with any socioeconomic situation as you can, and keeping in mind that not everybody's going to have the tools, but not everybody might have a paper plate to fold in half and put rice in to make a shaker, just things like that. And keeping in mind also rather that while we still have a job and we still have to teach, making the content where the students want to be in front of it and making it where they want to take that break instead of, I'm not going to focus on that. It's not important. It's not a core subject. And I don't know if that's something you could do in a prep program, but I know that in mine, I had a music tech class, but it wasn't on delivering content virtually. It was on dealing with music technology, like how to write drill and compose music and things like that. So I think if we can dive deeper now that we know what we're up against and put those resources in effect, it would definitely make music teachers' lives easier in prep programs and in the field.
Thank you. I'm going to, there's so much more that I would like to get to, but I'm going to close us on one last question. And this comes from Roshan Bliss, who works with young people every day. And he is asking, what can we do to better tap into the knowledge that students have, because they are the experts on their experience in this pandemic, and what can we be doing to hear from them and really deliver an education that is meeting their needs? Yes, Senator Lundeen.
Let them live in a demand pull environment instead of a supply push environment. Now that's a really big economic theory, but when you got a $13 billion enterprise, you can do amazing things to transform if you just flip how you look at the whole thing. So again, I'll say that it's a demand pull as opposed to a supply push environment. And what I mean by that is let those students say, you know what, here's what I need. Here's my experience, as those beautiful poems that we heard at the beginning told us. Here's my experience. And here's how my family interacts. And this is the culture I'm in. And I want to be integrated. I want to be part of the fabric of this beautiful state of Colorado and country of America. And every child, I think it bubbles in all of us, but we need to then respond to them in the circumstance which they find themselves. Now, there are certain irreducible minimums. You need to be able to read, write, and do the arithmetic. So we have to make sure that what they're seeking out covers those elements for certain, but we also need to let them seek it out in a way that feeds them instead of a way that's convenient for us to provide. And big, and you gotta move from really high concept to practical details, and that's not easy, but we're refusing to have the conversation about, are we willing to think about that high concept? And my argument is coronavirus is calling us to think about things differently, because we know the circumstance in which we find ourselves, which were challenged before, are failing many students currently.
Rep. Coleman.
Thank you so much, Erica, for the question. I think what we should do is just listen to them. I mean, if you just take the time to really listen and have a conversation, they'll tell you what's going on. I don't want to turn the conversation into it, but it's just the reality. You know, we've had about 30 kids in my district in the last 3 months get shot or killed. Yeah. And I've sat in some of those homes and talked with some of their peers in their house, in their living rooms. Like, you know, somebody called me and said, "Hey, we need you to, can you come?" And I'd show up. I think just hearing their story, hearing their perspective, and not just that, like, it's good that we're listening to them, but they really need to be stakeholders at the table. And we know what that means in politics. That means when we work on a policy, they're actually in the room, sitting down, giving perspective on what a bill idea or draft looks like, what it's saying, and how it's going to be implemented. Once it passes, the governor signs it, and it's enforced. We want them to be able to be at the table in that conversation, and that they actually can say, I had a hand in getting that piece of legislation passed. Not that I shared some concern or perspective and that was it. You know, I think the other piece for me, what I do, I have middle school and high school students working in my office, man. I know it's crazy, but I mean, they're smarter than we give them credit for. And they work, man. You know, they know what they're doing, what they're talking about. And then, you know, in addition to that, I put together. Sorry about that. I put together cabinets for different issues. One being education, and we have those conversations with those students. And they advise me on how I vote. They actually advise me on how I should vote on policy, so that when I vote a certain way, they can say, I advised him on policy. When I write letters of recommendation for the interns in my office, it's real. It's not getting coffee and, you know, scanning documents. I mean, they really are in committee and they're typing notes about the policy they're hearing. I mean, so my point in all that is, you know, I worked with Rashawn on policies in the past, trying to give our kids more voice, and people just didn't think they were ready for it. But I continue to show, at least through my office, that they can advise a legislator on how to vote. They can be a part of stakeholding conversations and help craft policy. And they can rally, they can protest, they can do it all, man. We just got to give them a chance. And I only say that, I shouldn't say only, but I say that as well as a parent, because my kids teach me stuff all the time. And that doesn't mean I'm not their father, but we got to figure out a way to make sure that they're engaged in the conversation in a real way, man.
Absolutely.
I think what we need to do, and the key here, is to stop treating kids as if there's the average kid. We need to stop looking at that. You know, the old saying was in education was get to average as efficiently as possible and you're good to go. That all changed in 2000 with No Child Left Behind. We said we're going to get every kid to perform at their highest levels. And so how we get there, I don't know if it's, you know, Senator Lundeen's Chicago School of Economics approach to this, or if it's, you know, it's within the system itself. But that shift itself of looking at the kid that has individual needs and how we tend to those, I think is a way that we really take this on. And that's a mind shift that I think is something I share with this, Senator Lundeen and Coleman, is through this, as we move through this, how do we think differently? And I'm not talking about technical shifts. I'm not talking about stopping the testing. I'm not talking about giving up teacher eval. I'm talking about systemic structural shifts and changes that need to take place if we are going to start to ensure that all kids can achieve at the level that they can. I hope Taylor's not getting yelled at by his administrator there.
Yeah. I'll let him deal with what he needs to deal with. I just want to thank all of our panelists. Are you able to rejoin us, or it's okay if you can't? Okay. Yeah, I just want to thank all of our panelists, Taylor Davis from the North Park District, Mark Sass from Adams 12, and Senator Lundeen, Rep. Coleman. And I want to thank again the Morgridge College of Education at DU for co-hosting with us, for being our event sponsor, and the School of Education and Human Development from the University of Colorado Denver for being our advertising partner. Again, you can find Chalkbeat stories at co.chalkbeat.org. We also have a newsletter, email newsletter that I recommend. And I'm going to turn it back to Caroline for a few closing matters. Yeah. And I'm so sorry for all the questions we couldn't get to.
I am as well. I'm going to open up the chat, the audience chat. Audience members, if you want to take a second just to write a note of thanks in the chat, I think our panelists would appreciate it. I want to echo thanks to our panelists for giving us so much of their time, as well as Erica for leading our discussion, and the student poets that joined us earlier. We had close to 150 people on this call, which is just amazing if you think about the room that would have physically filled. So we're really grateful. As y'all leave this event, a quick survey is going to pop up on your screen. It'll take 2 minutes, and it'll really help us, especially when we think about all that we didn't get to, all those amazing questions. As we think about future events, your survey responses will really help guide us. So thank you again from Chalkbeat, and we hope to see you soon. Have a good night, everyone.